are Geeks Not Nerds. I'm Captain Logan.
I'm Vince! Vince, today's question comes from
Stitch99, who wrote us a book. Here it is. I know you guys get a lot of GNN requests, but how much do you guys think that a sense of suspense plays into a movie or a book or anything really? And he goes on to say, after all, if not knowing what's going to happen was as big as we were led to believe, no one would ever watch an adaptation of a story they already know, a historical story, a prequel, or even rewatch movies. I've come to the conclusion that far too much emphasis is put on this idea, but would be interested to hear your thoughts. So, suspense. How important is suspense in a story, and why are things rewatchable?
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked. I think it depends. No, I'm kidding.
This is definitely a depends question.
So, how important is suspense? I think that really what we're talking about is, does suspense depend on knowing what's going to happen, or is there a roller coaster effect regardless of whether or not you know something's going to happen?
I will say that what I find really interesting is that he brings up adaptations because he's right. We do like adaptations of things a lot of times, even when we know how it's going to end, and even when it's very straightforward. Like, a lot of people will make adaptations that aren't real close to the original so they can tell a different story. You know, we hear this all the time, you know, with directors and writers trying to take up for the fact that it's not just like it was in the book, or whatever. Why would you want to see the exact same story again? However, I mean, The Wizard of Oz ends about the same way, right? I mean, like, you know, there are a lot of movies that more or less end the same way that their source material does, or things unfold similarly to the source material. So why is that? Why are we still okay with that? I think it kind of depends on the story. I think it depends on where the narrative is really flowing from. He's right about this when it comes to things that have O. Henry endings.
Yeah. I mean, when you have a surprise ending, it becomes difficult to... I mean, do you care about the movie because it's a good movie, or do you care about the movie because it has a twist ending? I mean, if the only good part of the movie is the twist ending, then, you know... why bother watch a Shyamalan movie?
Well, I was going to say, movies we should never remake. The Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
What? But I don't think it's fair to say that a movie like The Sixth Sense, the only thing good in it is the O. Henry ending. But I don't think that's fair. I do think that it loses something in the translation the second time around, where once you know where it's, or maybe the third time, because when you watch something like that, and there are other movies like this too, where you know. Where when you get to the ending, it's a big twist kind of thing. When you go back and rewatch it, you see how things line up in a different way than you would have before.
Yeah, I think
Source Code was like that.
I think it really depends. Well, think about this. If a movie's coming out of Hollywood or anything that's going to release a movie, it's generally going to have a happy ending. It's most of the time it's going to be a happy ending. So therefore, or at least an ending where the good guy wins to some extent.
I was going to say, I mean, we have a lot more pessimistic kinds of films now than we used to, but I hear what you're saying.
I mean, the point is that generally, if you go to a movie, you're going to see the good guy win. And so therefore, that removes a lot of the question as to what's going to happen. And I think the real question is suspense, or I think the real point is that suspense really works when you care about your character, and the torture that the character is going through is something that you can relate to, or something that you can care about them and hope that doesn't happen to them. Like, oh no, Spider-Man, don't let that happen to you. Fight against it. Well, of course Spider-Man wins. You know he's going to. Regardless of whether or not you've seen this particular incarnation of Doc Ock.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And this is going to sound like obnoxiously literary, but if there's enough stuff for me to pick apart, where like there's a lot going on thematically and character-wise and that sort of thing, where there's a lot to analyze, because you know me, I like to analyze, and not everybody likes to. People watch things on different levels. But I would say, this isn't a movie, but I would say, for instance, even though the whole point to Lost is more or less how it ends, I still find that to be a rewatchable series because I catch things every time I watch it. You know, stuff like that. So,
how engaging is the piece that you're watching?
Yeah,
or reading, or whatever.
And in what way and on what levels? Can you pick up more stuff every time you watch it? When it really has something to say, and especially when there are, again, I'm being literary, but when there are a lot of like different. What am I trying to say? When you've got like you know a lot of different meanings to objects and people and things like that, you can kind of analyze it and see which way movies are working on different levels. I did a 25-minute rewind on Batman Begins, and I could have done a much longer rewind on that movie. I find it very rewatchable because I'm picking more stuff out of it every time I watch it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to really boil it down to, I think that we're looking at suspense as if it's something that doesn't work with it. Like suspense is something you lay over the top of a plot. Is kind of the way we're looking at suspense here, which is not the way it is. I mean, if you have your plot and your characterization and everything works together to where you're making a character-driven story, then suspense is something that should be developed naturally, and it's something that you should care about because you care about the character.
That's a good point. You can still have that sense of suspense when you're really engaged in a character, even sometimes if you know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I would say that that's not always the case.
Like, for example, I know this isn't a movie, but when I was reading Ultimate Spider-Man, I really cared about, I suppose I still am reading Ultimate Spider-Man, but before Peter Parker died, I was really caring about what was going on, and I knew he wasn't going to die. And I still cared about it, and I was still engaged in suspense. But when they had the Spider-Man is going to die story arc, they told you what was going to happen, I didn't care anymore, because it wasn't a well-told story. So, take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking, again, we've been talking about death in comics a lot lately, but with something like that, when you're, if you know what's going to happen, it becomes more in getting involved in the moment and it being real for you, right? So even if you know what's going to happen, if it's done right, you're still going to really care. It still might bother you on some level if that's what it's trying to do. I don't know. I think stories can be effective in that way, even if you have a sense of how they're going to end. I'm not sure suspense has everything to do with endings.
Yeah,
that's a question I have for you.
That's a good point.
Is suspense always in the ending? Does it always have to do with what's going to happen in that third act, or is it simply I'm engaged and invested in these characters?
I mean, maybe we're looking at Stitch's question a little bit narrowly, saying that if you know the ending, is the suspense still effective?
Well, that seemed to be what he was alluding to in his question.
But maybe what we should be looking at is if we know everything that happens in the movie, is it still an effective suspense film? Well,
but and also, is this always about suspense? I mean, like, it seems like he's using the word suspense to simply mean you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I think that's kind of where it's coming from, and it's not.
So then the question becomes, how important is it that we know or don't know?
Well, let's look at the suspenseful film real quick.
Okay.
Jaws, the first Jaws, not any of the stuff that came after.
Is it rewatchable?
I think it's rewatchable because the characters are so fleshed out. But I think the suspense still functions because it's a well-made movie. So you sit there and you'll have maybe some nostalgic feelings, or not even nostalgic. Maybe you'll just have certain remembrances of things that happened where you say, "Oh man, it's coming," and I know that there's somebody that's going to get eaten, but it's coming. And I think that to some extent you can make certain deductions while you're watching a movie. You know certain things are going to come, but the suspense is still there for you because if it's a well-made piece, you want to be enthralled by it.
Even if something isn't especially formulaic, if you've watched enough movies, especially of certain genres, you might pick up on where something's going to go, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be any less of a thrilling experience.
Yeah, I mean, if you've watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre, if you watch any horror movie, you know several people are going to die. But you're still in the suspense of it.
That's a good question. Have you ever seen a horror film where no one died?
I can't recall.
I'd like to look into that. If anybody can tell us a horror film that exists where no one gets killed, I'd like to know that.
I can tell you one where not a lot of people die.
Right. What's that?
But Rosemary's Baby.
Oh yeah,
that's terrific. Definitely watch Rosemary's Baby.
I've never seen that. And then you have some of those movies where the token person dies very brutally and then nobody else does.
Yeah,
and that kind of happens. Yeah. I wanted to make a point about adaptations. Mm-hmm. I think the point of adaptations, sometimes, maybe a lot of the time, is, especially if it's a book to a movie, especially if it's one medium to another kind of medium, I think that it's not so much about like I know what's going to happen, and so this isn't like fun anymore. It's more about seeing how somebody else imagined that and put it on a different medium. Does that make any sense? Where it's kind of fun to see a director or writer, what have you, and see what their interpretation of a story is. And in that way, I think you can you can almost validate making numerous remakes of something if the story is good enough. And I know that we seem to go against remakes quite a bit these days, but I think it's because there are too many of them, not because remakes in general are a bad idea.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Alice in Wonderland has been done several times, but to see Tim Burton's, that would be interesting for people. You see what I'm saying? It would be like, oh, I got to see what Tim Burton did with that. Well, actually, that's a bad example because it was a different story. But you see what I'm saying? It's kind of fun to see what certain people's spin they'll put on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I agree. It's fun to see where things go, where things come from, and for books, it's nice to see how people can make it filmable, because of course a novel, you can do things in a novel that you can't possibly do in a movie or even a TV series.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things in a novel that you shouldn't try to put on screen because it might be boring.
Yeah, so there's that. I think we've answered the question.
I think so too. It's a complicated question.
Yeah.
And it's another one of those where it's very easy to say it depends, but it really does. It's you take it on a case by case basis, and certain things aren't especially rewatchable and aren't especially thrilling once you see them again. I have a question for you. Jurassic Park.
Well, I'd say it's still a solid flick for me. I enjoy it.
I still find it very watchable, even though I know it's going to happen.
I think where we're coming down on it is that suspense is not necessarily paired with knowing what's going to happen, because I think you know something is going to happen, or at least you can deduce what is probably going to happen.
And enjoying a film or a story doesn't always have everything to do with suspense. Yeah.
I think that a roller coaster effect can be there regardless of whether or not you know what's going to happen. I think it's something that that filmmakers develop and move along, and it starts slow, it builds up, it has its crescendo, and then it has its conclusion. It's the way it works, and I think that I think I'm repeating myself, so I'm just going to stop.
Well, hey, what do you think? Are movies and stories of different mediums better or worse because we see them several times? Things are rewatchable and that sort of thing. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Also, if there's something you'd like us to talk about in a future video, leave that in the comments as well. Thanks a lot for watching. I'm Captain Logan,
and I'm Vince, reminding you to support your local comic book stores.
I forgot you were going to do that. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time. Hello everyone, we are Geeks Not Nerds. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Vince!